This is RetRead Podcast.
We take a deep dive into the Fear Street series
And review other books we've read.
I'm Serge.
And I'm Anna.
We're happy you can join us. Hey, welcome back to yet another exciting episode of RetRead Podcast. Today we're going to start off by reviewing a book that Anna has recently picked up.
I feel like I've reviewed books from the Pendergast series before on this podcast, and some of them I liked, some of them I didn't. This is a book series, for those who don't know, that I have been into since I was in the 6th grade, and since my 10-year high school reunion is long in the past, that was a long time ago. It was obviously not an age-appropriate book for me to be reading at the time. The latest Pendergast book is Crooked River. This is the 19th book in the Pendergast series, and once again, we follow Special Agent Aloysius Pendergast and him solving some, weird crime that only he can solve. So, as long-running series go, this book has all the problems that show up later on in a series, right? It is a book that held so much promise and then slowly started unraveling and falling apart. I'm going to have a lot of spoilers in this because if you're reading this book, you probably don't really care about that sort of stuff anymore because it's literally book 19, a series that's been going on for 20 years at this point, or more than 20 years.
Let's just do a quick plot summary. I know in the past you've had some critiques of locations being kind of fake. How would you rate this one for the realisticity of the location?
Realisticity? Well, first of all, that's not anything to do with the plot synopsis of the book. So that's two different questions you've just asked. So okay. I'll just say that shoes with feet in them start washing onto the shores of Captiva Island in Florida. And as the numbers of feet with shoes start piling up, questions arise. Whose feet? Where are they from? What's going on? Enter Special Agent Pendergast. This is precisely the type of case that Pendergast thrives on. And as a reader, you're immediately hooked. It has the right amount of intrigue and build-up. It gets you invested pretty early on. But the problem is, something about this book just didn't hit the same way that a thriller like this should, or a Pendergast book should. Some of the previous books in the series have been a slog to get through. Obsidian Chamber, that was a slog. But something about this seemed really haphazard, like Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child were trying to meet a deadline. New characters are introduced, but not with the usual aplomb that one would expect from a Preston/Child book.
Well, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Captiva Island, real or not real?
It is real.
Okay, wow.
I did a cursory Google Maps search, so from what I can tell, most of the obvious geography is right. There is a Captiva Island. It is located where they say it is.
Do you think it's because of all the crap they got for Adirondack, New York?
I think it's because one of them might have vacationed there recently, while researching the book. That's probably that. So, yes, we'll give them points for that. I don't know if the rest of the geography is right, because one of the characters ends up going to Central America. He does some traveling there, and then he goes to Mexico. And then there's also traveling within Florida, so I can't really speak to the accuracy of that geography. Like I was saying, new characters are introduced, and, usually when this book series introduces a slew of new characters for the scene they're in, they do a really good job making it so that these characters sort of become vehicles to help the story go. They're sort of main characters, and you are sort of interested in more of their backstory and how they tie into everything, including Pendergast. But you don't really get that with these new characters. You don't really know much about them. They're kind of unnecessary, which is weird. But old characters are brought back, and some of them are brought back unnecessarily as well. There's some plot points that they introduce with some of these characters that they don't really do anything with, or they're just a waste of space that shouldn't have happened to begin with. And, when you read a book and there's plot points that shouldn't be there, you just feel like you've wasted a lot of time on these plots. And it's not good writing, I don't think. For instance, previous books in the series do have subplots that don't necessarily relate to the main case. And this book has 2 subplots that are like that, which is really frustrating. So the first one has to do with the journalist Roger Smithback. And he is brought back because his brother, William Smithback, who was in The Relic, which was the first book in the series, and a slew of other books before they kill him off, was one of the most popular characters in the series. And now they're like, oh, we killed one of our most popular characters. Let's bring his brother back in the same...
Wait, so his brother's basically just like a carbon copy of the original character.
But not as good or interesting. And he's not as well developed either. His main character trait is that he is William Smithback's brother. And it's like, okay, that's unnecessary.
Smithback light.
You know, he starts as the journalist that's covering the shoes on Captiva Island. You know, you could do something with that. You could actually develop him as a character. You could know more about him. He can be more than William Smithback's brother. There could be something to him. He could be dealing with his editor in a different way than how we saw Bill Smithback do it. He could be getting information in a way different, you know, or the same. You could do something with him. And instead of doing anything with him that would relate to the plot, like even having him, you know, be in the final boss battle or whatever, or have him be injured or have him rescued or like anything, they have him in a completely separate spot where he gets like abducted by another group that has nothing to do with anything. And then his resolution takes place like completely off screen, just wrapped up. And it's not even like wrapped up completely. Like it could be a cliffhanger for something else. You don't care enough for it to matter. And that's really frustrating. Like, why would you do that?
That's a glowing review from you right there about that particular character introduction.
Well, I mean, he was introduced in Versus the Dead, I think, which is the previous book, but whatever. And then you have the character that I hate the most in this entire series that was introduced many books ago. I don't see the point of her existence, Constance Green. And her subplot is basically the Scooby-Doo type of case that is also completely removed from the Captiva Island case and is just so frustrating. Like, Constance Green is like the manic pixie homicide girl of the series. She's a female character written with a very obvious male gaze, and they can't figure out what they want to do with her, aside from the fact that she is beautiful and she's a badass, and men look at her and are like lustful. And, you know, that's really odd because these two authors have come up with female characters that have been fantastic and strong and well developed and well written. You have Corey Swanson, who was introduced in Still Life with Crows. You know, she was in Whitefire. She has a spin-off series with Nora Kelly, who was introduced in Thunderhead and has been in like a bunch of books as well. They were in Ode Bones, which was a great book. You have Margot Green, who is basically the main character from The Relic, who was in a bunch of books. It's just amazing that these authors who can't have these amazing female characters have written Constance Green, who has written the most wish fulfillment character that I can think of. And the thing is, like, one of her main traits is that she is in love with Pendergast. Mm-hmm. And also that she is crazy. But that's really, like, all that they really go into. I mean, she is 140 years old, trapped in, like, a 20-year-old body. I mean, there's this whole thing. And it could be really interesting, but they haven't really done that with her. They
Vampire?
No, she was... It's a whole backstory. Cabinet of Curiosities. Go read that. But the point is, like, you know, her backstory is actually really interesting. And they mention, like, one offhand comment about her backstory here. But other than that, she is just wish fulfillment. And she's undeveloped. And with how many books she's been in, for her to still be this shockingly bland, yet over the top, undeveloped, yet pushed into our faces, there is something wrong with what they're doing. They seem too scared to really, like, dive into this Pendergast/Constance, like, ship. They're pushing it, and they either need to just commit to having them have this weird-ass relationship where it looks like he's dating, like, a 20-year-old girl or whatever, but she's actually, like, really ancient, and they can develop her as a character through that, or they don't have them hook up, and they can still develop her as a character. They can give her a spin-off where she can, like, be developed, or, you know, do cool things, just like Nora and Corey have their own spin-off. Or they could just kill her, but what they're doing with her is wasting our time as a reader.
Preach.
It's really frustrating. What is the point? Like, this whole subplot had no point. There's, like, this whole angst relationship thing that tends to be the type of thing that I like, and, like, they're ruining it. Everything about what they're trying to do should theoretically work, but it doesn't. There's, like, inklings of the Grissom Sarah thing with the two of them, but they're, like, not even doing it right.
From CSI.
Yes, correct. It's very, like, we don't know how to write relationships, and it shows. I will say that Special Agent Code Moon, who is Pendergast's partner...
Special Agent who?
Code Moon. He is Lakota. He's half Lakota, half Italian, I think. He was introduced in the previous book. I think he has been a fantastic addition to the series. His subplot actually had something to do with the main plot. It was actually integral to the main plot. And his interactions with Pendergast are actually really well written. And it reminded me of early parts of the series. You know, he could have been a character introduced in an earlier book and it would have been fine. He's a great new addition. I just wish they would do more with him. They also had, obviously, a Pendergast book isn't a Pendergast book if he doesn't, like, consult an expert and, like, get advice. And in this one, it was Dr. Gladstone and her assistant, Dr. Lamb. And the thing is, she could have been the same as, like, Dr. Kelly or Dr. Green from like previous books, but instead she's so underwritten. Like their research characters tend to be so important and pivotal to all the books, and they always have something important to do. And she and her assistant actually are the people that help figure out like everything, but you get nothing from them. All you know is that Dr. Lamb has like red shoes, and you know that Dr. Gladstone has funding issues, and it's like, shouldn't I know more about these characters who are like pivotal to the plot? In the end scene, the last act, something big is gonna happen to Dr. Gladstone. But because we know so little about her, the only reason you care about Dr. Gladstone is because Pendergast is upset that something might be happening to her. I feel like as a reader, you should be connecting with the character that's having something happening to them, not through another character, but that character in themselves. And I think it's like a tragedy that you didn't connect with her in that way. And
right.
I feel the same way about the police chief of the town. Police Chief Perlman, he and Pendergast had a good rapport too, and it was reminiscent of some of the other police officers that Pendergast had clicked with in other books. But the problem is that, like, his interactions with Pendergast were also missing something. He gets sidelined so many times, and then Constance is, like, made to be something, and then you're, like, wasting time with Smithback, and it just feels like something was missing. All these characters that are being used, they're just being thrown into a pot, but no thought is given into why they're being thrown into this pot together and how, you know, if you're cooking, you have to like think about all the ingredients you're putting in there and how the ingredients interact with each other and how they taste in the end.
Well, it sounds like they're just running the same old recipe. I'm so glad you mentioned kitchen and recipe, because that's what it seems like they're doing. You know, they're just going back to the same tried and true recipe, and they have a list of ingredients, right, that they need to throw together. You always have to have the Pendergast in there, so they throw in a pinch of Pendergast. Then they throw in like a couple of the tried and trues, and then they're like, well, there's no way we could have like the professor from that other book here, so let's just make a new professor character. And then they forget to fill in the backstory because they feel like they've already done it. They did it for that completely other character, and they're just too lazy to write new backstory for the brand new character that's just meant to be a drop-in replacement for the previous one.
I feel like maybe there's a little bit of that. The book does end in a cliffhanger. Obviously, they've already set up their next book. Whatever. I gave it 2 stars. I feel like I can't recommend this book to anyone unless you're a diehard Pendergast fan who needs to read all the books. You know, you're a completionist like me. You've like gone so far, you just have to do it.
You've given quite a few like Fear Street books a higher rating than 2 stars.
Well, I have a Fear Street scale. You know, they have collaborated with R.L. Stine. I actually read their collaboration recently. But I want to say that I actually went back after reading this book, and I was thinking, like, why is this book so bad? Maybe The Relic isn't as good as I remember it being. Because, you know, I did start reading when I was in 6th grade. It's been a few years since I actually reread it. Like, I used to read it all the time. It used to be one of my go-to books. I actually made Serge read it when we first met. Because I was like, this is one of my favorite books. You have to read it.
Yeah, it was a good book. I liked it. I thought it was fine.
But I was like, well, maybe as an older person, my taste has changed, and maybe I'll hate The Relic now. Maybe all my, like, oh, The Relic was so good, and all these other books in this series were so good. Maybe that was just misplaced nostalgia. So I actually am in the middle of The Relic. I'm almost done. There's, like, maybe 50 pages left in The Relic for me, and I have to say, I love it. I know every single thing that's going to happen in every single chapter. I know what all the characters are going to say to each other. And I am still, like, tense in the moments I'm supposed to be tense. There's still moments where, like, I'm too scared to look around because I'm afraid of, like, what's around the corner. The scene that they set, the characters that they created. Within the first couple pages, I know who these characters are. I know what they want these characters to be. And, you know, Pendergast doesn't show up till, like, page 80. Everything is set up so perfectly, so intricately. The right amount of tension, the right amount of setup. Everything is fantastic. The Relic, I 100% will recommend to anyone who likes thrillers. It is kind of scary, and the characters are so well developed. And if you get hooked and you want to read more Pendergast books, keep going until you get really bored. Because it will happen. And I do have to say, like, what I'm really, really pissed about in terms of the Pendergast series is how there are so many, like, bad books, but, like, in between the bad books, there's, like, amazing books. And it's just, like, it's so frustrating.
Maybe they just save it up. If you just put all your efforts into every single book, you're going to end up with just this mediocre base level. So what they do instead, right, is they just take a couple books off and save up their energy, their creative spirit, and then they just blow it all on, like, one good book, and then the next 2 books suck again. You know what I mean?
I think my big problem with this last book, Crooked River, the plot itself was, like, really interesting. Like, the shoes washing up, that happened in
Seattle or Vancouver.
Somewhere in
I
the
think it was
Northwest,
Vancouver, yeah.
things were washing up, and that's based on that. Well, guess what? Now they've used that story idea on a crappy book. It's frustrating. It could have been such a better book.
Oh well. Speaking of things that could have been such a better book, next up, we're gonna review Fear Street, 99 Fear Street, The House of Evil, The First Horror. This thing is like 3 levels of subtitle. Definitely a good sign. See you guys on the other side of the break.
Welcome back, guys. Now we're going to start talking about Fear Street, 99 Fear Street, The House of Evil, The First Horror. We're going to start with predictions, and it's only Surge because I accidentally started reading the book without making any predictions. So, sorry.
So I actually did okay, I think, on this one. I predicted that the plot would be about a house on Fear Street, which is number 99, and that was correct.
Do you want applause for that or something?
A little bit, yeah. There's also going to be 2 girls, and one of them actually summons the evil book. They tried to kill the evil book, and the book bleeds, but it won't die.
And what part of this do you think was accurate?
Well, okay, so technically, there is an evil book. You see, the diary that one of the characters is writing in is a book. It's evil because it turns out, this gets into my predictions about the murderer. I say the cursed book, or the evil book, is the murderer. And in the book, the diary, which I am going to be calling the evil book in this case, in effect murders the main character. So I think that's correct. And then I said murder weapon is knife, and that's, I mean, maybe it's true. I don't know. There's
No, it's absolutely not true. Okay. Move on.
And then murder gender, I said, this is so good. I said not applicable because books can't have a gender. And guess what? There is no real murder gender in this. There's like the house killing everybody. So guess what? I was right about the murder gender. I bet even if Anna had remembered to do the predictions, she would have never guessed that there was no murder gender. This is like such a good prediction, and I totally nailed it. And victim gender female, I got that right too.
You said it was a cursed book.
Well, book, house, I mean, the diary says, tonight I will die, and then she dies.
That wasn't from the diary, it was from the house that did it.
Well,
whatever. The plot synopsis
you're just jealous because I got
I'm
such
absolutely
a
not.
good prediction.
What? The Frasier family, not to be confused with Frasier Crane, moves into 99 Fear Street and is very much the house from hell. Think the Amityville horror house. But anyways,
I was actually reminded of the house from House of Leaves. But anyway, let's get right into the characters. First of all, we have Cali Frasier. She's the main character of the book and has a fraternal twin sister, Cody. She is going to be starting the 11th grade in the fall, so she's probably about 16 years old, and she has blonde hair.
Cody,
surprised about that.
Cody Frasier is her sister, her fraternal twin sister, and you don't get a description of her. Poor Cody.
I think they say that she looks a little bit different, but I assume she also has blonde hair, so...
That's the only important thing in an R.L. Stein book. Do they have blonde hair? What kind of blonde hair? Is it white blonde? No, but their brother James is 9 years old, and he has wavy red hair, and he's apparently very annoying. That's about that. You have Mr. and Mrs. Frasier, the parents.
Yeah, you have Jason Lurie, who's the real estate guy. He's the one that kind of gets Mr. and Mrs. Frasier to buy this house. He's described as being a short, wiry man, fairly young, with white, short hair, and round, black eyes.
Next you have Anthony, no last name given. He's the love interest. He has wavy black hair, dark, friendly eyes that crinkle on the sides. He has a nose that looks like it has been broken at least once. He lives in the old village, and he describes the old village as nice.
But in some past books, we have also gotten a description of the old village as kind of the rundown, poor part of town. Similar to Fear Street in a way, but more central.
And less haunted?
Yeah, less haunted.
Next you have Glen Hankers, who is a young man with straight black hair down to his shirt collar, small black eyes beneath bushy eyebrows, and a black mustache.
I completely forgot about Glenn.
The handyman.
Oh, right. Next up, we have Mrs. Nordstrom. She's the housekeeper, stern and sour-faced. She's also described as being short, squat, gray-haired, having lively dark eyes, and a short stub of a nose.
And finally, you have Mr. Stuyvesant, the town historian who works at the library. He's nearly bald except a tuft of white hair above his forehead, has a round red face, thin pointed nose, and tiny black eyes.
This episode is brought to you by Shady Side Realtors. Nothing to be afraid of when dealing with the shady realtors.
Let's just get into the in-depth plot, alright? You start the book with a prologue from the 1960s. You got two characters, Jimmy Lunt and Andy Sikowski, they don't matter. They're two kids who are working construction for a summer job during their break from college. And unfortunately for them, their summer job is working on 99 Fear Street.
This has just been a bad luck job from the start, and this place is just bad news.
Wow.
Already so far, 3 guys have gotten hurt while building the house. One got an electrical shock and was just released from the hospital. One fell off the roof with no rhyme or reason, and things just get weirder and weirder from there.
Well, Jimmy and Andy were sent to caulk some cracks in the basement foundation, even though the foundation was just poured 2 months ago. And actually, when they were digging up the ground for the foundation, bodies were found. So Jimmy goes to open a can of the caulk with his screwdriver. He slips, and he ends up with the screwdriver blade deep in his hand. So he's trying to pull it out of his hand, he throws it, and he kicks the wall. And the place where he kicked the wall, this massive crack appears. Jimmy and Andy just stand and watch as the crack slowly grows larger and larger, and then they hear scuttling, scratching, and a massive rat just pokes its head out from the crack, and then it's followed by another one, and then another one, and then they're surrounded by rats. And suddenly the rats are just swarming and attacking, and Jimmy and Andy are just trying to kick them off and trying to run away.
And then a black shadow starts to wriggle out from the crack, and as it comes out, it grows and changes shape. Floating out of the crack in the wall, it darkens, rising up and sweeping around them. It swirls faster and faster, surrounding them, and then it slowly lowers and covers them like a dark and heavy blanket. When it lifts a few seconds later, they're both dead.
And now we're here at present day, and I assume that's around 1994, because that's when the book was published.
Yep.
So the Frasier family is moving into 99 Fear Street. No one has lived in this house for the past 30 years. No one has ever lived in the house. They're driving to the house, they're getting a brief tour of Fear Street, they're a little lost, and, family conversations in the car.
So Cody, first of all, is appalled that anyone would name a street Fear Street. Her mom says it's named after one of the town's early settlers, which is true. Callie makes a terrible joke. It was named after Mr. Street?
Ha. No.
Yeah. Then she spends the entire next paragraph bragging about her sense of humor and her ability to make jokes and puns. Now, this is her internal monologue. You see, this book is actually written from Callie's point of view. So you're going to get a lot of this throughout the book where she explains to the reader how things are really going, right? She also uses it as a dig of her sister Cody. Cody is smart, but not funny.
That's so nice.
James is starting the, "You promised me a dog if we moved," nagging of the parents, and it's as annoying as it sounds.
Well, they finally get to Fear Street. The parents are so happy. But the twins are not that thrilled about the house, despite, the parents really talking up how big it is, how much space everyone will have, because the house is dark, depressing, cold, uninviting, the lawn is unkempt, there's debris everywhere.
It's a 2.5-story house with a wide yard, and the shingles are kind of weather-beaten. It might even look like the roof is rotting. I don't know. Most of the shutters are missing, but those that aren't missing are the paint is peeling off, the gutter is hanging loose and is bent. The whole thing looks in complete disrepair. I mean, the panes of the stained glass are faded and cracked. The pillar supporting the roof of the porch is tilted at an awkward angle and looks like it's about to topple. I mean, this whole thing's a mess. And a thicket of trees prevents any sunlight from filtering down to the house, so even though it's a bright sunny day outside, the house itself looks gloomy, dank, and dark.
Well, the Frasier parents acknowledge that, the house needs a little bit of work, but that's why they got such a good deal on it.
Money pit.
By any other name.
James is super psyched because he's going to get his own game room with a widescreen TV for his Super Nintendo and a real pinball machine.
James should really just focus on getting the dog, because I feel like the other things aren't going to happen.
Cody has already decided that the house is haunted. Cali then makes fun of Cody because apparently Cody thought their old apartment was haunted, but it was just a squirrel trapped in the walls.
Cody
Foreshadowing.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Cody insists that she's read many books about haunted houses, and they say that old houses are haunted by spirits of the people who used to live in them. That is also correct.
Cali makes fun of her because no one's ever lived in the house, and then says that maybe Cody will be the first to haunt it, and then makes some more jokes. Wow,
Oof,
more foreshadowing.
Karma.
Yeah, maybe no one lived there, but maybe some people died there. Do you think of that, Cali?
Cali, listen, Cali's not the smart one. Cody's the smart one.
Yeah.
Cali's the funny one.
Yeah, well, I wonder who gets the last laugh.
Cody is pissed and tired of Cali constantly making fun of her. This is just not cool. And Cali's like, you know what? Cody's issues with, her jokes comes from her innate jealousy from Cali being so pretty and so funny and having so many friends.
Yep. James is actually excited at the prospect of a ghost because then he'd have something to talk to at night.
Yeah, Mrs. Frasier is done with these conversations. She's just like, you know what? Get some work done. Go unpack the car.
Cali is given the box with all the fine china, and when she gets close to the front door, she hears a loud cracking sound. A heavy branch breaks off the tree and crashes onto the porch roof right above her.
She's lucky to be alive.
Yeah, the whole thing collapses and,
The
breaks.
Family runs up asking if she's okay. And
Yep. One thing we should mention is the china is done for. The box of fine china.
that's really what's important at this moment.
Mr. Lurie walks up to the family to welcome them to the house. This is the real estate salesman, remember. He has a strange, tense smile plastered on his face. He assures the kids that the Frasier parents will do a good job with the house. He says no one has ever lived here because of bad luck. He gives Mr. Frasier an extra set of keys and bids them farewell and good luck.
The Frasier parents tried to rally their kids' spirits to check out the inside of the house, and honestly, it's less inviting inside than it was on the outside.
There are cracks, the floorboards creak, the house is dark and damp. It feels like the sun has never shone on it. Cali hates it.
Well, Mrs. Frasier tries to cheer them up again and says, you know what? Go check out your rooms.
Cali hates it, but Cody is jealous that Cali has the biggest room.
Mrs. Frasier is super frustrated at the kids yet again.
Mr. Frasier tries to change the topic, but just listing all the things they need to do, which doesn't really make the kids much happier at all. And James just wants to talk about the game room, and Mr. Frasier is like, there isn't a game room. There's no room for a game room. And
did the parents promise him that there'd be one or something?
I don't know.
Well, James asked if he can make the basement the game room, like Billy Marcus, ping pong table and a pool table.
Oh yeah, we had a friend like that back in high school.
And we had a lot of friends like that back in high school.
Anyway, the three kids go check out the basement to become a game room, even though the parents know it's not finished. And they clearly just want the kids out of the way because they're just being way too negative.
Well, sending them to the unfinished, creepy basement is really going to make them really more positive.
The basement is a creepy wonderland with narrow, steep stairs, cobwebs everywhere, and a yellow light lighting the gray basement.
The cobwebs are literally covering everything. And then they hear a scratching sound. And suddenly, 3 rats are running right at them.
The rats are jumping on them and trying to attack them. Cali kicks them away as they race up the stairs.
The parents are obviously unhappy to hear about the rats. Mr. Frasier is upset that, that's another thing they have to add to their to-do list. It's getting longer and longer and longer, like with every passing second.
The doorbell rings, and conveniently enough, it's Glen Hankers. He saw the U-Haul and offers up his handyman services.
Mrs. Frasier wants to hire him, on the spot, because she knows how much work there needs to be done.
Mr. Frasier reasonably asks for some references.
But then James mentions rats.
Glenn mentions that he can take care of them. At this point, Mr. Frasier hires him on the spot. The agreement is that they can pay him by the hour, the week, or the month, and that's definitely not sketchy at all. Whatever.
Why are you buying a money pit that you know that you got a good price because you have to fix it all up and then suddenly hire someone?
All the savings just vanish in the air.
Now we get an entry in Cali's diary about the move.
AKA the death book. AKA the cursed book that kills her, because my prediction is 100%.
Yeah, anyways, that's not true. But she writes that she hates the new house. The movers finally got there and they were unpacking until super late. She talks about how Cody hates the house, but James is super psyched. Then she talks about her, boyfriend Rick, how much she misses him. But she can't talk to Cody about this because Rick and Cody went on one date before he decided to bail on Cody and date Cali. And then Cali goes on and on about how, like, Cody's the worst. Like, Cody has this horrible attitude. She's always jealous. She blames Cali for everything. And it's like, it's not her fault that Rick chose her over Cody. I mean, come on now. Everyone would choose Cali over Cody. Why can't Cody just get over it? We find out that Cali is going to be looking for a job tomorrow. Here's to finding something.
Breakfast the next morning. Cody opens the kitchen window to let in some fresh air and leans on the window. Suddenly, the window flies down and smashes right onto her wrist. She freaks out, but thankfully it's not broken. She said the window came crashing down as if someone was pushing it. Cody and Cali go about their day and agree to meet at the Corner, which is the local cafe, at 5 p.m.
Cali gets there and she just starts people watching. You know, she watches some of the teens there and dreams about being their friend one day when she starts at Shady Side High, which is a really great attitude to have. And she meets Anthony, who's working at the Corner, and they flirt for a bit.
Cody arrives and finds out that Cali got a job at the boutique called Too Cute, spelled T-W-O cute, a clothing store for couples.
What the hell is a clothing store for couples? Why would you want to match with your significant other? That sounds like really too cute, like T-O-O cute.
Cody is obviously not as lucky and upset that she didn't get a job, and she's pissed that Cali tries to make her feel better. She's also jealous that Anthony will obviously make the moves on Cali.
So they go home. And, you know, there's a bus moment. But anyways, you find out that the Frasiers got James a black lab retriever puppy.
Aw, and his name's Cubby. What a cute little thing. And you know what? Aren't cubbies in a wall normally?
Yeah.
Aw.
But also...
Little Cubby's gonna go in the wall.
Yeah,
oh,
there's a lot of like, good foreshadowing.
It's foreshadowing. This book's all
really
about
good job.
Yeah.
Wow, R.L. Stein.
Yeah.
Alright, so at dinner, the girls find out that the parents just hired a housekeeper, Mrs. Nordstrom, who just happened to pop by randomly.
Wow, what a coincidence.
How lucky.
Huh. The parents give Cody a job at home. Since, you know, she couldn't find a job outside, it's okay because she's good at woodworking and painting, so she can just work at home. She can fix up the house and they'll pay her by the hour. And she's just even going to get a lunch hour and everything. It'll be like a real job, except she's going to be at home all day.
She's still jealous that Cali has a real job in town, but, you know, she's happy she's going to get paid to do something.
Cali goes to get the salt and pepper shaker, and somehow, when squeezing behind her dad's chair, the knife he's using to carve the meat is plunged into his side.
What?
This is like a really awkward, weird thing. It's like he stabs himself. He's like, no, somebody grabbed my arm and made me stab myself. And Cali was right there, but she clearly isn't the one that did it.
He does actually accuse her of pushing his arm, and, you know, she denies that she did that.
And their parents had to go to the ER because Mr. Frasier, he ended up needing 12 stitches.
Well, Cody is sure it was a ghost because...
Of course.
Yeah.
She thinks it's haunted.
She backs Cali up, and she says, you know, she was watching it happen, and Cali didn't touch their dad.
She definitely didn't bump into him. And Cody is pissed that no one will believe her about it being a ghost.
Listen, she's read real books by real scientists about how ghosts are real. Take her seriously.
And she's pissed that everyone treats her like a joke and makes fun of her ghost theory.
Well,
Cali especially is being really mean about it, which is odd because, you know, I would prefer the ghost theory over being accused of stabbing my own father. I would be like, yes, the ghost for sure.
But anyway, so that night, Cali wakes up in the middle of the night to, like, soft knocking on her bedroom door.
She opens the door to find there's no one there, and everyone's door is closed.
So she goes back to sleep.
Except before she can actually go back to sleep, there's more knocks, and she pulls the covers over her face and tries to go back to sleep.
Which I find super relatable, because when I go camping and I hear, like, weird sounds outside, I just go, I didn't hear it, and pull the sleeping bag over my face.
Cody complains about weird noises all night, and Cali just claims that she heard nothing, even though she clearly did, but I guess she just doesn't want to encourage Cody's crazy theory.
Both Mrs. Nordstrom and Mr. Hankers arrive to do their jobs, and Cali's job calls and says, you know what, we're busy doing inventory, so don't come until Monday. Which, wouldn't you want the new person to come in to help do inventory?
Sometimes you don't want the new person there to, like, mess everything up on their first day on the job, you know?
Whatever.
Because she's like a sales girl, so she's not going to be, like, doing inventory. She's just going to be, like, enticing couples to buy matching outfits.
It's a small boutique. They do everything. Anyway, so she has to help Cody with the porch.
The sisters clear clear the air and agree to explore the town later and begin to work. Cody needs to climb onto the porch roof and pull off the damaged shingles from when the branch fell on it. And so Cali is going to have to be the one that's holding the ladder. Except that, after Cody climbs up, the ladder starts to shake, and a gentle trembling turns into something much harder, and the aluminum of the ladder starts to hum and vibrate. And even though Cali is putting her whole weight against the ladder to hold it steady, this is just not happening. The ladder actually starts to swing away from the house. It starts to topple backwards, and Cali kind of just jumps out of the way as it crashes down.
Cody gets the wind knocked out of her, but she's okay otherwise. She is pissed at Cali. She is convinced that Cali did this on purpose.
The parents are freaked out by the freak accidents in the house.
Once again, we're at a Cali diary entry, in the death book or whatever. And once again, she hears weird tapping on her door. And once again, no one is there when she goes to check.
She wakes up in the morning to find that all her clothing has been strewn about, and her closet is emptied out onto the floor. She storms downstairs to complain about it and enters a hectic kitchen scene.
James is running around looking for Cubby. He's just screaming, Cubby! Cubby!
Mrs. Nordstrom is going down to the basement with the laundry despite the basement being full of rats. She says the rats are the ones scared of her. Cali is sent to look for Cubby since no one is interested in what she's saying about her clothing.
Well, she opens the front door and she sees that someone has scrawled the number 99 on the outside wall of the house in what looks like blood. And she lets loose and screams.
Her scream brings the family to the yard. They figure out it's paint, not blood. Everyone is on edge. James is still upset that Cubby is missing, so Cali decides to go help him look for Cubby. Anything to get away from the house.
Well, they walk all along Fear Street trying to find Cubby, and Cali is not impressed by the homes on Fear Street. They're all dark, depressing, ramshackle. She is just not into it. But, you know what she's into?
Yeah, she's into Anthony from the corner, and they actually run into Anthony, who happens to be mowing a lawn nearby. He's doing it as a summer job, but no way would he live on Fear Street. His family is too superstitious.
He's actually appalled to find out that Cali lives in 99 Fear Street, of all the houses on Fear Street.
Didn't anybody warn her family about it?
Cali invites him over for lunch to tell her about the house, and he refuses because he's freaked out by the house.
She eventually pressures him into accepting and rushes home to get lunch ready because, cute boy, woo!
That's definitely more important than Cubby.
Yep.
Lunch happens, and Anthony launches into the story of 99 Fear Street, which he heard about from the town historian.
Who works in the library. Yeah, why is this kid randomly talking to like some boring ass old town historian?
Because Mr. Stuyvesant, went to Shadyside High. They had a whole class on like the history of Shadyside. The real question is, why is the town historian peddling these like stories to the kids instead of
or why the corporation hasn't shut him down yet? Just to like give them a baseline introduction to the whole Fear Street thing, he first launches into a story of Simon Fear, which we are all familiar with by this point.
We'll talk about Simon Fear in the mythos. It's fine, guys. Don't worry. We got you covered.
Yeah.
But then Anthony talks about how when the foundation for this house, 99 Fear Street, was being dug up 30 years ago, they dug up a ton of old coffins with the Fear family crest on the lids. And there were skeletons inside.
People thought that this was a burying place for victims of Simon Fear and his wife.
The guy that built the house more than 30 years ago, it was some dude with his wife, son, and daughter, and it's the 60s, so no woman's gonna buy a house on her own. So obviously the guy is the important one.
When the workers asked what to do with the graves, the man told them to keep working. He said he didn't care about a bunch of old bones.
See, that's where his problem started.
Mm-hmm. When the house was finished, he brought his family to see the house. They were going to move in a few weeks later.
At one point, he went upstairs because he heard workers finishing up, and he wanted to see what they were doing, but he didn't want his family to see. He wanted them to be surprised when they moved in, so he just told them to stay downstairs.
After he came back down, he found that his family was still sitting in the living room, but their heads were missing. It looked like they were torn off at the neck. The heads were never found, but their guts were pouring out of their neck holes.
Yeah, so, the house just sat there because, no one wanted to move in, and everyone knows the story of 99 Fear Street, except the Frasier family.
At this point, just as Cody and Cali are chilled to the bone by the story of their creepy as fuck house, James rushes out of the house to tell everyone that he has actually heard Cubby.
Everyone quiets down, and you know what? They also hear Cubby's high-pitched yips.
They run all over the place, in the backyard, all around the house, every nook and cranny they can think of. No Cubby, but they can still hear his excited yips.
So that night, Cali is going through everything that's happened in the evil book, or death book, or whatever you want to call it, when she hears the knocking again.
You mean her diary?
Yes.
This time, she gets the door soon enough to catch Cody in the act. It was Cody doing the knocking. Cody needed Cali to believe that the house was evil and haunted and that all the accidents were due to something evil. Cody admits to throwing everything out of her closet and smearing the paint on the side of the house. Cali is really pissed that Cody has been stressing out her parents more than usual. Their dad has been muttering to himself about Cubby and the house. Cali begs Cody to drop the ghost stuff for a while, let everyone settle into the house. Cali tosses and turns for a bit and finally decides to go splash some water in her face. Unfortunately,
chunky green liquid as sour smelling as vomit pours out of the faucet. Turning off the faucet won't stop it from coming out. The knob gets stuck and it just starts overflowing all over the bathroom.
Cody and their dad run out of their rooms trying to help her.
James runs out screaming that he can hear Cubby, and everyone goes silent, and they hear the barking and high-pitched frantic wails of poor little Cubby.
Mrs. Frasier runs out of her room covered in blood. It dripped onto her from the ceiling. There's a dark puddle of blood on the ceiling above the bed, and it's trickling down in a steady stream. It's on the bed all over Mrs. Frasier.
Mr. Frasier decides that it's coming from the attic, and he needs to go up to investigate to see what's causing this weird red blood type thing. So he's gone for a bit, and everyone's a bit worried. He finally comes down and he is shell-shocked. He just keeps muttering, heads, over and over again. He saw 3 human heads, a woman, and 2 children. He is inconsolable. He's muttering heads, and then he just starts screaming that they need to call the police. There's heads, just heads.
The police spend 30 minutes investigating, but they don't find any heads. They can't explain the green goop or the blood, but they do call a doctor to tranquilize Mr. Frasier to calm him down. This is so sad too, right? Because in that moment, when Cali catches Cody, you think, aha, maybe all of this ghost shit is just Cody fucking around, everything's gonna be fine, Cali goes to sleep, or tries to, and it's like, you know what, I can't quite fall asleep yet, I'm gonna try to splash some water on my face to help myself go to sleep, and then everything fucking melts down. We're reminded that Cubby's still somewhere in the fucking wall, then green goop everywhere, blood coming out, and the heads, and now Mr. Frasier doesn't know about the heads yet, but we already heard the story from Anthony about the missing heads.
Well,
we kind of surmise, oh shit, this must be the heads of the original owner's family.
Well, we're going to get there because the next day, Mr. Frasier decides that he needs to call Mr. Leary. Cody has told her parents the story that Anthony had told Cali and Cody.
And they're freaking out.
Even though Mr. Frasier was the only one who got some sleep because he was tranquilized, he's still the most out of it. He's muttering to himself, breathing hard. He just goes on and on about heads because, that must have been traumatizing.
Surely Mr. Lurie knew about the problem. He's been a real estate agent in Shadyside for more than 30 years. So he must have known. Mr. Frasier is going to demand his money back and tear up the mortgage.
Because that's how it works. Mr. Frasier takes Mr. Lurie's card out of his wallet and then realizes there's no phone number on the card. Mm-hmm. Just his address, 424 Fear Street.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what? How did he even do business with this guy?
Him?
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, he calls the operator to try to get a phone number, and there's no listing. Mr. Frasier decides it's time to pay Mr. Lurie a visit. Cali wants to go with her dad as emotional support, and it's a short drive down the street, and they arrive at an empty lot. There's no 424 Fear Street.
Who could have known that? Cali suggests that maybe they should go to the library to talk to the town historian. He'll know who or where Mr. Lurie is. Mr. Frasier agrees, but he's still muttering to himself. They gave Mr. Lurie all their money, every single penny. It all went to the house. Raises the question, how are you going to pay the handyman and the housekeeper? And your daughter.
Or the mortgage.
He said
he had a mortgage, but they spent all the money on the house. What
is the goal here, people? But anyway.
It sounds like Mr. Frasier actually has no idea what he did or what the money went for, or what is going on with his finances.
They find Mr. Stuyvesant, the historian, at the library, and he also happens to be the town directory because he's so old he knows everything and everyone. And he's never heard of Mr. Lorry.
He goes to the current business register and doesn't find anything. Then he goes through the historical record for the town. He's been keeping it since the 50s. That's 40 years.
He finds Jason Lurie in his historical records. Jason Lurie was a real estate agent. In July 1960, he found his family murdered in a new house that he had just built for them. A month later, he hanged himself in the house. That house
was 99 Fear Street. Who could have guessed it? They bought a haunted house from a dead man.
Cali writes in her diary about, the rest of the day. Obviously, the family is freaking out and wants to move away ASAP, but they have no money.
Mr. Frasier is acting strange. He's upset and can't seem to focus. He paces around and talks loudly to himself. He mumbles about Simon Fear, Mr. Lurie, the bodies.
I wouldn't really say that's acting strange. He's acting as someone would probably act in this situation.
Just get your family out of there, man. What are you waiting for?
They can still hear Cubby crying, like mournful, lonely howls. James is still looking for Cubby everywhere, but can't seem to find him.
Nothing weird has happened again, but the family's on edge.
Of course they are.
Mr. Hankers comes in every day and goes straight to the basement. Callie assumes he's just there to deal with the rats, but who knows what the hell he's doing there all day. Callie's been going to work and hanging out with Anthony. Anthony's actually coming over for dinner the next day. Saturday night has arrived, and so has Anthony. Callie and Anthony make out, and Cody is the third wheel. They have their meal and clear the dishes so they can go watch a movie. Anthony starts washing the dishes and turning on the garbage disposal. Of course, somehow, Anthony's hand goes into the disposal.
Letting out a low cry, she stepped into the kitchen in time to see him tugging his arm, bending and pulling, tugging with all his strength as he screamed, struggling to pull his hand from the roaring, grinding sink drain. Finally, the hand came free. His eyes bulging with horror, Anthony raised his arm in front of him. My hand! The hand was a mangled pulp, a pink and red mass of skin, blood, and bone. My fingers! He shrieked, his shrill voice rising over the grinding roar. Where are my fingers? Callie hesitated for a second, cupping her hand over her mouth as she gaped in horror at Anthony's pulpy hand. Then, ignoring the wave of nausea that swept up from her stomach, she dove past him to the sink. She clicked off the garbage disposal. Anthony's frantic howls rose through the quiet. My fingers! My fingers! Leaning over the sink, Callie peered down into the drain. Then sobbing, gasping in noisy, shallow breaths, she plunged her hand down and pulled up the 2 fingers that had been cut off. My fingers! My fingers! Anthony was shrieking, holding the mangled hand in front of his face with his other hand.
Yeah, that was really, really messed up. They get him to the hospital, and the next day, Callie visits him, and he's groggy from the painkillers and in shock. His parents say that while the doctors were able to sew the fingers back on, he'll probably never be able to use them again. They said Anthony claims that a force grabbed him and pulled his hand down into the disposal.
That is like my nightmare come true right there. All is tense at the Frasier house. Mr. Frasier had tried to get some money from a cousin, but that didn't pan out. The cousin had a bad year financially, tax issues, whatever. The point is, no go there.
Yeah, and hopefully Mr. Frasier has good insurance on this house because some kid just lost 2 fingers, in his kitchen sink drain, so yeah.
James is curled up rocking in place. He keeps talking about how he can hear Cubby crying for him.
Cody tries to ask her dad what they're going to do. He decides that it's time to work on the porch and fix the shingles and lists a bunch of chores.
I'm pretty sure that is not what Cody meant.
The kids are not having any of it, but he sends them right to bed. James asks Callie to read Pug the Ugly Bunny to him. It's a picture book he hasn't read in 5 years, but he just needs the comfort.
Yeah, so via a diary entry from Callie, we learn that James has basically reverted to a younger version of himself. He's scared of everything. He wants to be babied. He is scared to have the window open. He's scared of the light being off. This is not the James that we were introduced to at the beginning of the book. And this is not the James that she's seen in years and years. Mrs. Frasier has become quiet and withdrawn, and she'll basically go to her room after dinner and just lie in bed in the dark, just not saying anything, not doing anything, just lying in bed.
Well, she was covered in the blood of like 3 severed heads.
Yeah, that would do it. Mr. Frasier spends hours just pacing back and forth, mumbling and talking to himself like a crazy person.
Holy shit.
And sometimes he gets like a weird expression on his face, like he doesn't recognize anyone. He just keeps talking about how he's going to find Mr. Lurie, get all his money back, and then he talks about how they need to fix the house up and make it presentable.
Those are like 2 separate things.
Well, you know. And also, Anthony and his family are basically freezing Cali out. They want nothing to do with the Frasier family.
Understandable. But sucks for her. The quiet of the night is shattered by James screaming for his parents. Everyone runs out but can't find James. They can hear his voice clearly, but he's nowhere in sight.
He keeps calling them to find him. How it's so dark where he is, and he's begging them to find him because he's so scared.
Mrs. Frasier says that she hears him on the other side of the wall, causing Mr. Frasier to start tearing the wallpaper. He rips his nails, cuts his fingers trying to scratch through the wall. Callie is sent to the basement to get the sledgehammer. When she gets to the basement, she sees that the floor looks like it's moving. It's a sea of rats. At least a dozen of them with tiny red eyes and snake-like tails. Callie manages to get the sledgehammer when the rats suddenly stop moving. As she runs back to the stairs, she hears a deafening shrill rat hiss pierce the air.
Mr. Frasier takes the sledgehammer and starts slamming through the wall, and you know what he finds?
Nothing. Which is exactly what the handyman has been doing in the basement this whole time.
Or maybe he's doing exactly what he wants to be doing. They think they hear James downstairs in the living room, so they all rush down there.
Mrs. Frasier falls down the stairs in her rush to get James, and her arm is broken. A jagged bone is poking through the tear in her sleeve. She doesn't want to leave because she needs to help find James.
Mr. Frasier is also fixated on finding James. Like, everything has gone wrong, but he will save his son. He hears James's voice. Maybe it's coming from the ceiling? And then they hear James and Cubby again. And James has found Cubby. And listen, he can save both his son and their puppy.
Yeah, so, James is like, I found Cubby. He's right here.
Mr. Frasier drags over the ladder and just starts smashing the ceiling. He makes the ceiling hole big enough for him to stick his head into the ceiling, and he starts calling for James.
At this point, Callie sees a dark hand. Not a human hand, a shadow hand, a transparent hand, gray and billowy, made of smoke with wriggling longer fingers like snakes. The hand swirls around Mr. Frasier's face, covering his face in darkness. When the darkness disappears, Mr. Frasier is blind.
They spent the day in the hospital, and the police has searched every inch of the house. No sign of James, no sign of Cubby, no decapitated heads, nothing.
Mrs. Frasier had surgery on her arm. She also called some cousins who are letting the family move in for a while. Mr. Frasier is still in the hospital. When he's released, they'll pack up and drive home. Callie goes to bed and can't even write in her diary. She starts crying about everything. She's interrupted by a sound. 3 knocks on her door. She's incensed that Cody would start with his bullshit again. She sees Cody fleeing down the hall. She chases after her, and as she draws closer, she realizes that it's not Cody, it's Callie. She's looking at herself. Evil Callie tells Callie to go back to her room, to go read her diary.
Callie's legs trembled. Her heart was racing. Somehow, she managed to turn away. Somehow, she was able to make her way back to her bedroom. She clicked on the light. She crossed to her desk. The diary was open, just as she had left it. She clicked on the desk lamp. She bent over the diary, bringing her face down close. A new entry. There was a new entry on the open page of the diary, in Callie's handwriting. Callie moved her lips silently as she read it. I died tonight.
Chilling, isn't it? Evil Callie says that she's actually Callie's ghost. A diary wouldn't lie. A sharp wave of pain shoots up through Callie's body. The floor is bubbling up over her feet, hot and sticky, steaming black tar, clinging tight, pulling and holding her in its simmering heat. The burning tar gets up to her knees. Callie reaches to grab her legs, but as she does so, a dozen hands poke up through the tar to start grabbing her into the swarming black pit. Callie manages to get Cody's attention, but Cody is frozen in terror at what she sees. As she finally manages to run over and try to grab Callie's hand, the tar fumes are swirling around Callie's face. choking and blinding her.
Cali grabbed Cody's hand, felt its strong tug, then felt it slip away. Cody! Cody! No! Cody! Help me! Laughter burned Cali's ears. The scornful laughter of her own ghost. Cody! Where are you? Cody! And then Cali saw the faces emerge from the rolling waves of tar. The faces of the dead. The hideous, decayed faces. Grinning skulls with their rotting teeth. Faces with empty eye sockets, dark holes where mouths should be. Struggling to free herself as the tar-covered hands pulled her down into the putrid black heat. Cali stared at the faces as they whirled around her, at the torn lips, the toothless grins, the gaping holes in the flesh of their cheeks. So many hideous faces. Where did they come from? Where? And why are they grinning at me? Why are they pulling me? Where are they taking me? Cody? Cali's last word. And then the tar rolled over her neck, up to her chin, burning her, choking her. And she had no choice. She gave into it. Gave into the darkness. Gave into the boiling, simmering heat. Gave in to the evil of the house. Cali let it bubble over her head, over her. And when she emerged from the tar a few moments later, she was different in every way. The evil, the overpowering evil of the house had consumed her. Cali rose up from the seething tar, and as she rose, she realized she had become the ghost of herself she had met in the dark hallway. And as she floated up, she felt the century-old rage, felt all the anger, all the fury, all the smoldering evil. So much evil that the walls rang out with her scornful laughter, the laughter of 100 tortured souls now triumphant inside her. Cali floated through the house, floated through a new world of swirling dark shadows. A ghost, an evil ghost in a house of evil, unaware of anything but her own hatred and anger.
Wow. I mean, what can I say after that? That was truly frightening. I remember when I read that, I got chills. I was scared. I was like looking around like, oh my God, because it was like really scary. This is probably the most scary, actually frightening Fear Street book I've ever read. And that passage was like, that basically sums it up. And we've never even had, I don't think, a main character die before like this. And we've certainly never had like the main character die and see it from like their point of view.
Well, not only did the main character die, she is now evil. She's become one with the house.
Yeah, it's a real twist. I don't know how anybody could have seen this one coming. Anyway, 2 days later, the Frasiers are coming home from Cali's funeral. They pack the car the next morning, ready to leave. They've accepted that they'll never see James again. Cody takes one final look at the house and sees Cali in the window. Her parents tell her to get in the car because they need to GTFO. Cody walks to the house and tells Cali that she promises that she'll be back for her one day. Cali's ghost laughs and vows vengeance on them if they ever do come back. As they leave, she lets out a furious wail that shakes the walls and rattles the windows. An unknown amount of time passes, but now it's early fall. Cali hears Mr. Lurie outside with a new family. Parents with a good-looking teenage son named Brant. The book ends with Cali making plans about what she's going to do with the new family. The end.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Oh my God! I'm moving to Shadyside in a few weeks, and I don't even have a place to live.
Do you have a realtor?
No, I've heard some sketchy stories about realtors there selling homes with, like, sordid histories, and I don't know.
You know, I actually recommend the Shady Realtors. Other realtors have been licensed at some point, and have been on the job for several decades. They know everything there is to know about the homes in Shadyside. In fact, they helped me buy this house.
Really? Cool. Well, that sounds good, but can they provide references?
Sure thing. Oh my God, look over there. Is that a rat?
What? Where? Oh God, no! Wait, I don't see anything.
Oh, huh. It must have gone away somewhere. Anyway, if you need a cheap home fast, give the Shady Realtors a call at 740-229-9618 and mention RetRead Podcast to get their premier curated home list. And yes, they even have a phone number. How legit is that?
Fear Street Mythos.
And we have, to start off with, I think the biggest thing we need to talk about here is yet another retelling of the story of the Fear family legend. And we've heard this in several of the books now, and the story's a little bit different each time, but I feel like ever since the Fear Saga books, it's kind of solidified and generally always the same story. It's Simon Fear and his wife, and they have a house, and they do evil shit. Then I guess, they pay the ultimate price and die.
They lived in Shadyside about 100 years ago. People are afraid to bulldoze the Fear Mansion, even though it's a burnt-out husk because Simon Fear was a bad dude. And you figure they, dug up a cemetery nearby that belonged to the Fears and look at what it's doing to the families that go to that place. So if you mess with the Fear house and try to build something there, clearly nothing good is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. The interesting little new tidbit here is, we always heard that there might have been some unsavory things that went on. But now there's a very specific story that there are these bodies, which are the remains of the unfortunate victims of the Fears. And they were actually, I guess, just buried in a hole, like in a mass grave in the woods. Later on, when Fear Street came to be and this new housing development started up, they dug up the bodies.
It wasn't really a mass grave since they were all put in coffins. It's less, it's still horrible. There's still a ton of coffins, but they weren't just
unmarked
thrown
graves,
into...
like unmarked graves in a pit.
It sounds like Chernobyl almost.
Pretty bad. Interesting, right? Yeah, maybe there's some kind of contamination and that's why they were sealed away.
Yeah, just to finish it off, Simon and his wife Angelica lived in a big mansion in the woods. They did all kind of horrible stuff, and there's all kinds of weird stories about them, like how they used to torture and kill people. And we've heard that, obviously, Fear Street Saga, Fear Street Cheerleaders, Party Summer. It's come up a few times.
This is really interesting because there is some evil in this house for sure. This is one of the most supernatural of all of the books. And it seems like there's two angles to this, right? One angle is Mr. Lurie. He builds this house. What he does is kind of evil to begin with. As you're laying the foundation of the house, that's an interesting ceremonial part of building any building is we like to have a ceremony for big public works where you lay the cornerstone. And the idea is that the foundation of the house is not just the foundation in the physical realm, but it's also the foundation temporally because it's the first part you build. So not only does it support the physical structure of the house, it also supports the temporal history of the house. It is the founding moment. So it's important to start off on the right foot. It's important to have a little ceremony to write a nice message on the cornerstone. It's important to have something good at the beginning. Mr. Lurie does the thing you really should never do, which is he starts off the house, both physically and temporally, in an act of evil, right? He discovers this mass grave, and he says, I don't care that I'm disturbing the rest of these poor, unfortunate souls, victims of the Fear's atrocities. It doesn't matter. It's just a house. Meanwhile, this is the house he wants his family to live in. So right as they're digging the foundation, he lays the foundation for his own demise there. And his singular act of evil there, I think, is a big part of what's going on here. But then also, we have this creeping evil up from under the ground, through these graves, through the coffins, from the dead spirits. The evil of the Fears is here too. I think the two of them join together and kind of intertwine to form the evil of this house, which takes on a life of its own.
And because they are where they are, it is allowed to take a life of its own.
Yes.
Helped by the minerals or whatever is in the soil.
Sure.
That's what allows it to
probably
happen.
Feeds off of that energy. One interesting question here is that why does it take that 30-year gap from 1960 until 1994? Does it need that time in order to sort of germinate and become a fully fledged evil house? That's the one thing I'm not really sure about.
It was an evil house right away since it killed Mr. Lurie's family.
And the construction workers, and Mr. Lurie died as well. But then the gap. It's weird.
Yeah, it's what happened for it to necessitate Mr. Lurie to lure people there. That's in his name, right? Lure.
Yeah.
So the question is, Mr. Lurie is a ghost, right? So how did Mr. Frasier contact him in the first place? He didn't have a phone number to contact him later. So how did this all happen?
Right, so this is just like Mr. Lurie was.
A lure?
So Mr. Lurie did an evil thing by building that house in a mass grave. I think Mr. Frasier must have done something. He is being punished for some crazy he did something.
Yeah, he moved his family to a money pit without any research.
Well, he doesn't even seem to actually have a real mortgage because that's through a bank, not through the real estate agent. So he is probably really bad with money, has no idea how mortgages work.
Yes, well, I don't think tearing up a mortgage does anything either. I could tear up all the mortgage statements for my bank, and you know what would happen? Nothing.
Yeah.
They would just take my house because I didn't pay them.
Yeah, so...
And I don't get my money back.
So he doesn't seem to understand what a mortgage is, or where to get it, or where it comes from. You can't even get a mortgage without a home inspection, at least where we live, and this place would never pass a home inspection. And also, any, home inspector would have looked at it and told Mr. Frasier, hey, there's X, Y, and Z wrong with it. And yet, they seem surprised by all the stuff that's wrong with it when they move in. It's like, they bought this house sight unseen, yet somehow still got a mortgage. We're doing nitpicks now at this point, aren't we?
We're definitely a nitpicks. I was asking, Mr. Lurie has a business card that sends them to a fake lot on Fear Street.
Mm.
First of all, how did he get in contact with Mr. Frasier? How did contact work? Because you have to find a real estate agent somehow, and if you don't live in that area, they obviously aren't from Shadyside, so that's why they don't know the history of 99 Fear Street. So how did he get in contact with Mr. Lurie? Did Mr. Lurie randomly call him and go, hey, are you looking for a house? I have one, which would be really weird.
I think I see where you're going here. I think you're talking about how there must have been a representative from the corporation to actually lure them in. And the question would be, what is the game here? Why are they trying to lure people in here?
Because the guy just said his name is whatever Lurie. What was his name?
Yeah, maybe he's not really Mr. Lurie. Maybe he's just somebody posing as Mr. Lurie.
You could just randomly put the person's name, because they didn't have a picture of Mr. Lurie in the 1950s directory. Jason Lurie.
And where'd they get the business card, right? Ghosts don't have business cards.
Yeah, and
that's a common known fact, actually, that ghosts don't have business cards.
You read it in one of Cody's books?
I think so, yeah.
But also for it to have 424, the empty lot. 4, like we've said before, in Mandarin is death, right?
Yep, and in German is fear.
Is it fear to fear? Are the Frasiers somehow related to the fears? Or is something related to the fears, bringing people to Fear Street?
That's interesting.
Is it wordplay? Is it death to death, bringing people to death using the Mandarin translation of the 4? Or is it the German thing, bringing people to Fear Street? Why would either the Fear family need people to be coming here, or why would the corporation need people to be coming here? It's obviously one of the two forces at work.
Here's a possibility, right? If the Fears killed these people, maybe they were actually trying to get rid of something that was a threat to them. And maybe by trying to revive this threat, the corporation is actually building something up that can be used as a force against the Fears. So maybe these are the bodies of dead goods. On the other side, this could be a deep fear power that has lain dormant for a long time. And now the Fear family is trying to power up their base again. And they need to fuel it with the souls of new victims. So I'm actually kind of leaning towards the latter, because we've seen a lot of action from the corporation. They're becoming more and more involved. Their little tendrils are spreading everywhere, and they're really kind of taking over the whole town. They're trying to corner the whole market on exploiting the resource of the blue clay mineral. And I feel like this is a point in time when the Fear family is going to want to fight back. They're going to want to reclaim what they feel is theirs, and they're going to want to stand up to what the corporation is doing. They're not going to take this sitting down. This house, I really think this has something more to do with the Fear family than the corporation or the natural kind of forces of Fear Street. I think this is a true Fear family dark saga that's going on here, and it's about time, honestly.
Maybe it's because of some spell or whatever that Angelica had cast on some of the people she had killed when these people initially died. Maybe this is somehow trying to bring Fears back to Fear Street, to either punish the Fear family or punish tangentially somebody related to the Fears. You marry enough, maybe the Frasiers are actually related to the Fears somehow, and now they're trying to bring Fears back who don't know they're Fears, who don't know anything about that.
Crypto Fears. We call them Crypto Fears.
So maybe they're trying to summon Crypto Fears to end the Fear bloodline as a way to seek revenge of what had happened to them because of Angelica.
On the flip side, they could be crypto goods. This could be a Fear family plot to finally end the other branches of the Good family once and for all, thereby weaken the corporation maybe. which we believe might be run by Goods. So I think, like, going back to your idea of Angelica, I think is important. She could have been using a necromancy kind of spell in order to power her own magic and also power the fear magic by using the life force of other people. And then they would have been putting these people, like, burying them in the graves. I'm thinking maybe whatever happened that went awry and caused the mansion to burn down put a stop or put a pause on this. But I think if you restart the process again and start feeding new, fresh bodies, fresh souls into this magic, then you may be able to revive some of the ancient power of the fears.
How is this evil related to the evil in the cheerleader?
I think it's a totally different thing. We get a description of it. It crawls up out of the cracks. And that's interesting too, right? It's a shadow that comes out of the cracks. So it's right in the foundation, and it's spaces opening up inside the foundation. And once it enters the house, it actually ends up opening up spaces inside the house, between the walls, between the ceiling of the first floor, the floor of the second floor, and spaces in the attic. Spaces that can't actually be accessed by the living. These are spaces for the dead, but they're large, and they exist, and there is a connection to the real world. We can still hear Cubby barking a week or 2 weeks after he disappears. We still hear James crying out for help. That's where I get the kind of House of Leaves sort of vibes from this thing.
There is no time, there is no space.
There's even like a tiny little time loop wherein Cali dies, but her ghost actually appears to her before she's dead.
That's true.
There's even like a weird little reverse time delay on everything. As soon as this spirit flows into the house, it opens up these spaces, and it opens up flexibility in time as well. The 30-year gap that we saw in the real world may not have felt like a 30-year gap to the evil spirit itself, because time can actually operate completely differently for it.
Another question is, the house already took James, it took Cubby, but it didn't do anything to them in terms of changing them. Why did it do that to Cali?
Yeah, I guess there's like a difference between James, Cubby, and Cali.
I mean, Cali always had the ability to be, I don't like using the term bitchy, but there was something about her. She was always very mean to Cody in underhanded ways. So do you think that because she had an underlying...
She had something it could feed off of.
Yeah, whereas James was so young and innocent, he just wanted a dog in a game room.
And the dog was...
a dog.
The other interesting thing about this is that the deed for the house has to be registered with the town or the county. And how the hell did they buy this house? Because, again, going back to the kind of what sounded like a nitpick I had earlier, Mr. Frasier doesn't sound like he knows what he did, but he must have done something. And...
well, I mean, the book starts with them talking about how, they're finally going to have a house. It will be bigger than the apartment. So maybe they were renting beforehand. And, we rented for a while before purchasing a house. So we had the internet to tell us what the entire home buying process was.
Yeah, and I still screwed up a bunch of stuff anyway.
But, they didn't have that in 1994. I mean, I guess they didn't have anyone to ask or talk to about it, but they just trusted their real estate agent. And he must have said, oh, I'll take care of everything for you. But the real question is, what did the corporation or the shell company or whatever that took the Frasier's money, like, what did they need the money for? Like, Mr. Lurie is a dead ghost, or not. If Mr. Lurie was a ghost, then ghosts don't need money because he's a ghost. But if we operate under the belief that, this was a person who knew the myth, because, everyone in Shadyside apparently knows the story. Apparently Mr. Stuyvesant goes to the school and tells the story all the time. So someone knows the story and took advantage of it, used a name that was, associated to the death that happened, knew that there was an empty lot, and then went, yes, this money is mine. Whether this person operated on his own, or he was part of the corporation.
Well, there seems to be a team here. Mr. Lurie's not the only one taking money from them. We also have a handyman and a maid. I got an interesting vibe from them. I got the kind of vibe... remember we used to have this idea that...
the Guardians of Fear Street?
Yeah. I was thinking that, and we even had the puppy there. I definitely got like an echo of that concept with the maid and the handyman. They're kind of like silent observers almost. Nothing happened to them. They didn't do anything either. And it just kind of...
they were never really shocked. They weren't really there when anything happened. I think Mrs. Nordstrom was there when Cubby went missing at one point. But they don't really react to anything happening.
Mrs. Nordstrom said the rats are more afraid of her than she is of them. The handyman always went down to the basement, even though it's full of rats. Obviously they didn't bother him. He didn't seem to bother the rats though either. So who knows what the hell they were doing down there. But I think they're kind kind of involved. They must have at least known what was happening.
But I feel like the guardians of 99 Fair Street is what they are.
The other thing that I kind of had a thought of is the house located on some kind of weird evil nexus, right? Now, we talked about how that spirit that seeped up through the foundation can open up space and can open up time. Maybe there is like an evil nexus in space-time located right at this house. And we already know that the entire Fear Street, Fear Woods area is in and of itself basically a larger nexus for evil. I guess we always assumed like, oh, the Fear Mansion must be the central point of the nexus. Maybe it's the cemetery. What if it's actually this house? And this is where the similarities with House of Leaves really come in. In the House of Leaves, the idea is that it also has a lot of spaces that can open up inside of it. So, for example, one of the early ways that they find out that this happens is they measure the distance between two rooms inside the house by measuring the distance between the windows, right, inside the house. And then they measure the same distance outside the house, and the distances don't match up. They find out that maybe there's like a space in the closet between the two rooms, but when they open up that closet and they look inside and they measure that space, it's still off by like an inch. As they keep discovering more things about the house, they actually find there's doorways that lead into corridors that don't match the floor plan at all. And eventually they find out these corridors go on for basically an infinite amount of time. They eventually discover old legends that when the first settlers came to that area, the Native Americans actually knew about this place. And at that time, all it was a staircase leading down. So imagine just like a woods, and there's a clearing in the middle of the woods, and then right in the middle of the clearing is just a stone staircase leading down into the ground infinitely. Eventually it became a house somehow. Nobody knows how. Maybe somebody built a house on top of the staircase. Maybe it just morphed into a house later on. And the idea behind this House of Leaves was that it could take on any form, any shape, depending on the psyche of whoever was inhabiting it or whoever went into it. And this is kind of a similar concept here with this book with 99 Fear Street, where it seems to have these internal spaces which go on forever, are hard to access, and depend on the psyche of the person who enters them. So, for example, somebody like Cubby, who's an innocent little puppy, enters it, and he could just wander around forever. Nothing bad necessarily happens to him. You get James, who enters it, and it's a little bit worse. He says it's dark and he can't see anything, but it's not like he dies right away and he ends up finding Cubby. It's not that horrible. It's just next level up. It's frightening. It's blinding, but he's still okay. And then next level up, you see Cali. Her psyche is different. When she falls into the house, she describes it as being absorbed by the tar. Now, maybe this is exactly what happened to James. Maybe James also got absorbed by the tar. But when she got absorbed by the tar, she gave into it. It's literally described as we read in that passage. She gives into the evil and becomes part of it. Maybe the difference is that there wasn't a part of James that could give into the evil. And so he went through the tar and came out the other side unchanged. She didn't. She became part of the evil. Now, going back, the House of Leaves, those corridors were actually analyzed by this family that moved in. They actually took a sample back out and had it analyzed, and it turns out it was made out of a material similar to a chondrite meteor, which is a type of common class of meteors that is in the solar system. And so the idea was, maybe House of Leaves is actually this old meteor that fell to Earth God knows how long ago and somehow got these weird space properties. So this actually got me thinking, one of the original ideas I kind of had about the blue clay mineral, and this is back when we were reading the saga, what if that little pendant that the Fears had, and it had this weird blue jewel, and we were like, what if this is related to the mineral on Fear Street? Maybe that's the reason they would drawn eventually to Shadyside.
Well, don't forget the monkey head with the crystal's eyes in Missing.
Yes, exactly. The only question, though, is they came from some nondescript European country, and the question is, how the heck did something in the old world possess the same mineral as this deposit, which is centered in Shadyside? And I thought, okay, wait a second. If a meteor falls to Earth, sometimes it breaks up a little bit in the atmosphere first, or maybe beforehand comes down as a meteor shower. So either the main part of the meteor or asteroid came down in Shadyside. That's where the main deposit is. But little bits were scattered throughout the Earth, and they're part of that same spirit. They're always trying to find their way back, and that's how the Fears found their way to Shadyside. a little piece of that was in Europe back in the day and took hold of that family and guided it to America, guided it back to Shadyside so that that fragment could be reunited with the greater whole. And so now we're talking about the possible extrastellar, extraterrestrial origin of the blue clay mineral deposit. And when I say extrastellar, I mean, what if it wasn't a meteor or an asteroid? What if it's like a giant alien spaceship that crashed here like 1 billion years ago and is decaying and turning into like a mineral, turning into stone, and has all this weird properties, the weird time loops we saw in many Fear Street books, the weird space-time anomalies, all of this stuff could just be like the old warp drive core malfunctioning and causing glitches in the way we perceive reality. So this could really explain that medallion got brought back from the old world in the old saga, and this could really explain the nexus. This house could be part of the central nexus, a way for the power of the asteroid to break out into the real world. But it needs the souls of living human beings to feed off of, to power that supply, to regenerate enough energy to power up all of those old systems. This is probably what Angelica was trying to do, what Simon Fear were trying to do. They were trying to harness the true energy. You see what the corporation is doing by mining the deposits, by studying the mineral? They're just scratching the surface. They don't understand the true power. And that is what the Fears are trying to do right now. They're doing an end run around the corporation, and they're going to unlock and harness the true energy before the corporation even knows what hit them.
Well, I hope R.L. Stine doesn't ruin your theory with the next 2 books.
All right, callbacks?
The Corner, which is the cafe.
Yep.
We've seen it before. That's probably the only big callback we've had.
They don't get a chance to go to school because they all die and or move away before school starts. 90s things.
Super Nintendo.
There's no Zillow, Trulia, or Redfin, which are websites that people now commonly use in order to find a house to buy. Those websites also explain how to get a mortgage and other facets like how to know that your real estate agent isn't a giant scam. And they'll give you like fun little pro tips like make sure you have their phone number and that they give you a real address for their office.
Also that they're licensed.
Another thing that's offered on those websites is the house history. So you can look at the history of the property to see like what the tax assessment is and who's lived there and when it was sold and built and for how much and how many times it was sold. And if they had looked at that for this property, it would have thrown a million red flags.
Well, also when you buy a house, at least in New York State nowadays, you have the right to ask about the history of the house. So you can say, did anyone die in this house? And they have to tell you the answer honestly.
Also, in order to get a mortgage, you have to do a title search, which finds out who currently holds the title or deed to the house and make sure that there's no other claims for it. That makes sure that whoever's trying to sell you the house actually has the house to sell to you and isn't just selling you a fake deed. Money. Yeah, all of those things would nowadays be much more easily accessible, even to somebody like Mr. Frasier, who is completely clueless and has no idea what he's doing. Why doesn't Mr. Frasier ever call the police after he finds out Mr. Laurie was a fraud? Shouldn't he contact the FBI or someone? He should have all the paperwork. If he doesn't have the paperwork, like what kind of shady-ass deal did he make for this house?
Instead of just muttering, we need to find him, we'll get our money.
Get the paperwork out, call the police, go over it with like a lawyer, figure out what the hell happened.
And get your family out of the house.
Also interesting, yeah, at least in New York, you need to have a lawyer in order to buy a house. So any competent lawyer would have seen like all the glaring problems with what's going on here. So another weird thing that Mr. Frasier does is he hires a handyman and housekeeper without looking them up on Google or Angie's List or any number of other websites that now exist to rate handymen and housekeepers.
I think what's actually a nitpick, why would you hire a housekeeper and a handyman when you have no money? And also, why would you also hire your daughter as a handyman who is clearly doing more than the handyman that you've hired?
If they have money for a maid and a handyman to be doing nothing in the basement all day long, why did they end up buying this weird old house? It sounds like maybe they do have a disposable income after all.
Yeah, why are you buying a money pit? If you guys haven't seen Tom Hanks' movie Money Pit, it was on Netflix.
That movie is hilarious.
The point is, like, why would you sink all your money into a money pit when you could clearly get a mortgage for a house that's either cheaper elsewhere or just not buy a house?
You could just keep renting. You live in the old village and rent probably for a lot cheaper and your kids won't die.
Well, maybe they wanted a good school system, but at the same time, I think Fear Street is either like the most expensive or the cheapest places to buy a house, depending on who you talk to. The girl in Haunted was rich. And she lived in
but
Fear
then
Street.
it talked about how they only lived there because her dad wanted that old style mansion type of house. They could have afforded, obviously, to live in the North Hills if they wanted to. Her dad didn't want like a crappy, like new style house.
Right. I mean, the houses on Fear Street have been described as ramshackle and run down, but this house is next level ramshackle and run down.
Yeah.
Figure out your budget when you gotta buy a house. Think about like how much you're gonna spend. It's probably gonna be a lot of money to fix it up. They bought a house that's gonna be a lot more money to fix it up. So much is wrong with the house and how they bought the house.
I think a lot of it, I'm just gonna blame Mr. Frasier for everything. And this kind of ties into a point I wanted to make as we're coming down to our final thoughts in the book and our rating. I want to talk about the significance of Mr. Frasier being blinded by the ghostly hand of evil. This is another part where R.L. Stine gets back to what his finest Fear Street books have had, which is almost an awareness of the classical literature out there. So classically, blindness represents either an unwillingness or inability to see the truth. Or, conversely, a character's inner wisdom and vision. And I think it's not the latter, it's the former. I think, in this case, R.L. Stine is literally showing Mr. Frasier blinded by that hand as a way to represent his real-world unwillingness or inability to see the truth in front of him. The truth being that he really goofed big time buying this house. And this is something that Mr. Frasier is unwilling to admit to himself. He's unwilling to just take his family out of there and take them to safety. He keeps muttering to himself, I'll get in touch with Lurie and I'll get a refund, but I'll fix up the whole house. When Cody asks him, what are we going to do? He's like giving them a list of all the stuff that needs to get fixed. And it's like, no, dude, you're blind to what's going on. Some interesting literary examples of this are when the character Gloucester is blinded in King Lear, and later he cannot recognize his true son Edgar and almost kills himself as a result. He later dies when the truth is revealed. In Oedipus Rex, Oedipus blinds himself to prevent himself from seeing the true horror of what he's done. Remember, this is the guy that banged his mom and killed his dad?
Well, he didn't know at the time, which is why he has to blind himself later.
Yeah. These are two really well-known examples.
I mean, listen, you got the classical literary references, but I'm going to go with Event Horizon, the classic 1997 movie, I think, where...
Oh, that's right. The scientist.
Sam Neill's character blinds himself.
Yeah, after he's possessed by the evil. Yeah, so I think that moment where he's blinded, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, so overall, I mean, this book blew me away. I didn't know that R.L. Stine was actually capable of writing something this scary. I got chills. I was frightened. I was moved by this book. I mean, this is like seriously really scary.
When I was reading the last passage I had read, I was thinking how well written it was. It conveyed so much in 2 pages. It set up the mood, it set up the tension, it set up the scene, it set up the character's transition from the Cali that we knew to evil Cali. And it did it so perfectly. I mean, we shit on R.L. Stine a lot for his writing. I mean, we shit on him a lot. But this is one instance where I think we need to give him his due. I mean, this is actually good writing. It was really well done.
I wonder what came over him. Like, maybe he was, like, on vacation or something and just particularly relaxed and, like, the deadline wasn't anytime soon and he just, like, took a little extra time and did, like, a second draft.
It is a classic horror trope, right? The haunted house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we saw it in the Amityville Horror House. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which was made into a Netflix original series.
Mm-hmm.
Lock and Key, you know, Joe Hill's graphic novel, which turned into a Netflix original series. So many episodes of, like, The Outer Limits or, like, Sci-Fi or The X-Files, they deal with a haunted house.
House of Leaves.
By Mark Z. Danielewski.
Edgar Cantero's Supernatural Enhancements. Any number of other haunted house books. I mean, the list goes on.
I mean, movies, books, there's a ton. So R.L. Stine took what is a normal horror trope. You know, this was his take on it. Usually when R.L. Stine does his take on something, it's not usually good. It's usually a lesser version of, like, something we've seen before.
It's not one of the finer examples of the craft, you might say.
And, you know, like, a lot of what he did was kind of stuff we've seen elsewhere, like weird things happening. But he actually did put his own original spin on it. He did do something a little different. You know, he had the one bus scene with the introduction of Cubby, but for the most part, everything stayed pretty consistent. There was nothing really overly dumb.
Even the cast of characters was like limited. They didn't have like any extraneous characters that were there for no reason.
He stayed in the house for the most part. Like, he could have followed Cali to work, because you know, there were a few times where he had mentioned offhand, like, she had gone to work, she had some coworkers that she liked, she hung out with Anthony. Like, he didn't really go into that at all. He just stayed in the house with the family.
Yep.
And you could feel like the tension rising within the family. When the family started falling apart, you could see it happening because you saw them at the beginning and you saw the slight changes chapter by chapter by chapter. So he didn't just do like a haunted house book. He did like almost like a psychological horror thriller for the Frasier family. I thought he didn't give in to his worst tendencies. There was the scene where she meets Anthony, but he didn't do much with it. There was a scene where he, like, talked about her old boyfriend, Rick, but then, like, that's forgotten about. He doesn't focus on the nonsensical things that he sometimes does tend to, you know, like oh, he's so good looking, I just want to kiss him. He really forgoes that, and what he does is he uses that amount of time to build up the house. This is one of the few instances where he does spend a good amount of time building up important characters. He does spend a good amount of time setting up the scene because you're staying in that one place for the most part.
Yeah. You know, I actually want to mention something while you were talking. I realized something. Maybe he's actually good at doing the tropes, and he just sucks at when he tries to invent his own stupid premise. Like, a lot of the books that really fell flat for us, I feel like aren't a tried and true horror trope. They're just some kind of like weird thing that he's trying to shoehorn into the premise of like Shadyside High School / Fear Street. What's something scary that would happen to teenagers? And then he just has like the manatees like pull idea balls out of like
human trafficking in a hospital.
That's a perfect example. And it's like not that scary and it's stupid. But when he goes back to the tried and true, like for example, Vampire Story.
Goodnight Kiss.
Goodnight Kiss was actually pretty scary. And it's just like a tried and true vampire book. You know, we have a tried and true haunted house. He just follows the formula that's worked for hundreds of years. And guess what? It still freaking works. Then he tries his own new thing, and it's really hit or miss, mostly miss.
There is something cliche about the book itself, but I feel like he did it well. He did the cliches well.
And the little flourishes that he put in there, the little additions, like Mr. Frasier getting blinded, all of the foreshadowing throughout. Like a second reading of this book, and you go like, whoa, he lets you know right in the first chapter exactly what's going to happen. The character actually says it to you. You don't realize that until later. And when you sprinkle in little things like that, that's what makes it a good read. He did good. He did good.
It's all the little nuances that he put into it. And then he sprinkles in a little bit of like the history of the fears while he's at it. And you know, he adds a little more to like this whole mythology that he has been like putting together slowly since he started the series.
I mean, this is where we get the big reveal that it's actually like a giant spaceship and or asteroid buried underneath Fear Street, which is so cool.
I mean, the fact that they would bury bodies with the Fear family crest, I mean, that says something too. I mean, we're told that, you know, these are the people that they've like murdered and tortured or killed and whatever, but they're still putting them in coffins with the Fear family crest. Like, what does that mean? What does that represent?
It's a mystery, right? Maybe we'll find out in the next book.
Before we get to the next book, how many evil rats would you give this book?
Out of 5? I would give this book a solid 3 evil rats out of 5.
That's on a normal book scale?
That's on a normal book scale.
I would give it a 5 out of 5 on the Fear Street scale.
Nice.
I mean, there are scary moments. This is the first Fear Street book where I read it and went, oh my god, I am legit scared.
This would be the Fear Street book that if somebody was like, oh, I heard you do a Fear Street podcast, which Fear Street book should I read? I would probably give them this book to read because it's pretty decent and they wouldn't think less of me after reading it. If I gave them something like The Knife, they'd be like, oh, you've devoted how many years of your life to reviewing these books? Wow, you must be stupid. Then you give them this book and they go like, okay, I kind of see it. And then hopefully they don't read any of the other ones. You know, it's actually a really good intro to the Fear Street series as a whole. If you're out there and you're not sure if you want to read Fear Street or not.
But you spent like an inordinate amount of time listening to an episode of a podcast.
Right. This would be towards the end of the episode. But if you haven't made up your mind yet, I would say this is a really good entry point. Or if you have a friend you want to recommend Fear Street to, this is a good entry point to the series. It gives you a light amount of background on the Fear family myth. It talks about the burnt down mansion. It talks about Simon Fear and Angelica. So it gives you that. That appears in a lot of the books. books, but this gives you a good grounding for that. It has a good, solid, scary story, and it mentions some of the other things. It mentions the corner, mentions Shadyside High, it mentions Old Town. It really sets the scene for what Shadyside looks like, what the history of Shadyside is a little bit about, and it's scary. It's a good introductory book to the series. How about predictions for Fear Street, 99 Fear Street, The House of Evil, Second Horror? So first of all, why don't you describe the book cover for us?
The cover for 99 Fear Street, The House of Evil, the Second Horror. It has a boy and a girl, and they are running away from a house. And obviously it's Brenda, who was introduced in the last chapter of the first horror, running away from 99 Fear Street, because obviously. What's really weird is, so Brandt, his name is Brandt, like Gary Brandt's last name. R.L. Stine is already, letting me down here.
His name's not Brandt.
Brandt is running away from 99 Fear Street. He's got a girl with him. I assume since it's, late fall, he is going to Shadyside High. So this is obviously a girl he's picked up. So they're running away from the house. Next to them, for some reason, it looks like, I don't know, fireworks or rockets? There's 3 of them. And then there's, a skull imprinted on it. So I assume that maybe they're setting off, fireworks or something for homecoming? I don't know, but they obviously discover, James's dead body or something. But I have no clue what this thing next to them is, to be honest. It might be fireworks, it might just be, sticks, but why would you have random sticks? Anyways, there's, a lightning storm going on behind them, so I assume, something about the home and, the storm going on freaks them out, and that's why Brenda and his, girlfriend or whatever need to run away from the house.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the cover. But Brenda looks very 90s. He's got a t-shirt with jeans. He's got that 90s haircut that boys had in boy bands, or is framing your face. The girl actually is looking very nice. She has beautiful long flowing hair and this nice red sweater. And she is very cozy up against him, which is why I think girlfriend and not sister.
I see what you mean. Yep. So my prediction is that a new family moves in and is haunted by Cali's ghost. The murder weapon will be beheading, and the murderer gender is going to be female. Cali is the murderer and main antagonist of the book, so it's going to be the female ghost of Cali. And the victim gender will be male.
Well, I'm saying Brenda moves into the house, as we saw in the epilogue of the previous book, and obviously the house is trying to kill him through Cali. The murder weapon is obviously the house through some supernatural nonsense. Maybe via Cali. I don't know what she would do, but something's happening. The murderer gender, well, it's a house. And the victim gender, I say, is female.
Okay.
I feel like Brenda might get away.
All right, let's see what happens. Predictions are in place, and we will find out in the next episode who is more wrong, me or Anna.
Please don't let R.L. Stine ruin what was a great start to a trilogy.
I feel like he might. Let's see if Brandon makes it through this one, alive or dead.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of RetRead Podcast.
Join us again as we continue our journey down Fear Street.
We love hearing from you guys, so feel free to reach out to us at RetRead Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Email us at ret.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe.
Once again, thanks for listening. See you again soon.